Hello, welcome to the Tucson Unified School District web-based training on cash handling for student club sponsors. My name is Karen Smith. I am a partner at Heinfeld & Meach. We serve as the independent auditors for the school district. The district administration has requested I prepare and present this training for you. As a student club sponsor, you have an important responsibility in handling cash. The monies collected by student clubs, such as student council, is not district money. Rather, it is monies the district is holding on behalf of the student club. Therefore, stronger controls must be in place to properly collect, safeguard, deposit, and spend these monies. Unfortunately, there are many recent examples from Arizona school districts where district staff, including club sponsors, teachers, and administrators, mishandled and misused student club monies. In each of these examples, the district employee was convicted on felony charges. The Arizona Auditor General's Office is responsible for the investigation and prosecution in these cases. The Arizona Auditor General's Office considers a threshold of $1 when considering misuse or misappropriations. You can see in these cases, the first one, we had a culinary arts teacher and club sponsor who violated state laws related to theft, misuse of public monies, and fraudulent schemes. This club sponsor embezzled almost $13,000 by creating false invoices. At another school district, we had a bookstore manager misuse $72,000 of public monies and embezzled over $67,000 for her own personal purposes. At another Arizona school district, there is an athletic director and math teacher who unlawfully appropriated over $10,000 and another almost $2,500 for himself and another employee. And in the last example, we had a principal from an Arizona school district who violated state laws related to the misuse of public monies, theft, and fraudulent schemes by embezzling almost $34,000. Today, we will be reviewing all things related to student activity monies. First, it is important to understand when we are referencing student activities, that means student clubs. For example, Student Council, National Honor Society, Yearbook Club, Senior Class, Football Club, Skateboarding Club, and all the other clubs you may have on your campus. As part of today's training, we will review the various regulations, including local governing board policies, state statutes, and the Arizona Auditor General Requirements. The Arizona Auditor General Requirements are found in a rule book called the Uniform System of Financial Records, USFR. This training will help you understand these rules, regulations, and laws pertaining to cash. This will help protect you and your fellow employees from possible misuse and misappropriations and ultimately investigation from the Arizona Auditor General's Office. We will also discuss the procedures to follow when your club holds a fundraiser and if you're required to utilize a change fund at those particular events. These transactions and decisions will all be documented in student club meeting minutes. We'll review how to document these meeting minutes and what should be maintained in those meeting minutes. As I mentioned earlier, student activities are those monies raised by student clubs. Overall, the rule for these monies is that they are the monies raised by the students, spent by the students, to benefit the students. So today we aren't referring to booster club fundraisers or PTO fundraisers ran by the adults. These are outside fundraisers. However, as you know, often kids are involved. So if that's the case, then it would be considered a joint fundraiser, and we'll be reviewing those rules as well. So let's review what constitutes student activities or a student club. First, it is a club that is organized by students. This organization is approved by the campus principal. Specifically, Tucson Unified School District Policy JJA addresses this requirement. Club sponsors are expected to complete this training. Once approved by the principal, the club is then recognized by your student council on the campus. The student club completes a constitution that identifies the purpose of the club, the membership, the officers, things such as that. All clubs are required to have a club sponsor. This club sponsor must be a district employee. A club sponsor must sign the sponsor declaration form that acknowledges that the club sponsor understands their responsibilities. This declaration is completed on an annual basis. The officers of the club are also responsible for submitting a signature form annually. This signature form is used to verify that the individuals who signed the club minutes are the valid and approved current officers of that club. The bottom line rule when it comes to student activities is the purpose of these clubs is to benefit our students. So that's an important reminder that our student clubs must benefit our students. So where do all these rules come from? There are multiple influencing rules and regulations that impact the operation of our student activities. First, we have the Arizona Revised Statute, ARS. This identifies the laws required to be followed within the state of Arizona. These laws can be found in Title 15. The Uniform System of Financial Records is the second influencing factor. The USFR prescribes the minimum internal control policies and procedures to be used by all Arizona school districts for accounting, financial reporting, budgeting, cash handling, and various other compliance requirements. The requirements of the USFR are based on the Arizona Constitution, the Arizona Revised Statutes mentioned earlier, as well as Arizona Attorney General opinions. These Arizona Attorney General opinions, often referred to as AG opinions, are issued when requested by the legislature or any public officer of the state or a county attorney on a question of the law related to their office. Finally, we have our local policies and procedures and accounting responsibilities. The School District Policy Manual contains policies established by the governing board and administrative regulations of the superintendent. Generally, the role of the governing board is to set policy, and the role of the administration is to determine how to execute it. Let's look at some of the Arizona Revised Statutes and district policy related to student activities. First, we have the Arizona Revised Statute 151121 that defines what student activity monies are. And as we mentioned earlier, those are monies raised by the efforts of our students. We have Arizona Revised Statute 151122 that requires that the school district establish a student activities treasurer, that is an adult responsible for the administration of the student activity monies. And finally, we have Arizona Revised Statute 151123 that dictates the requirements for the deposit of the revenues and how the monies can be spent. Tucson Unified School District Policy, JJF, defines what student activity monies are, and that definition is consistent with the Arizona Revised Statute definition that student activity monies are those monies raised by the efforts of students. Additionally, Tucson Unified School District Policy, JJE, identifies the requirements for student fundraising activities. And specifically within this policy, you will find reference that student activity fundraisers cannot take place during instructional time, meaning it cannot be detrimental to the regularly planned instructional time. They can, however, take place before school, after school, during passing periods, or during lunch if food is not sold. The Arizona Auditor General's Office provides specific requirements that must be followed. These procedures are the minimum controls that must be in place. These requirements are found in the Uniform System of Financial Records Manual, the USFR. These requirements include that monies are raised by the efforts of students. Monies benefit the students currently in school, which means money should not be carried forward from year to year. The monies raised should benefit the kids currently in school. All monies must be receipted. We're going to talk quite a bit about how to receipt these monies. USFR also requires that each student club must have a district employee serve as the club sponsor. Each club shall prepare minutes for all of its meetings, especially when the club is making a decision to spend monies. Those meeting minutes must be detailed, identifying what the kids have approved. Another USFR requirement is that student club monies cannot defray district expenses. What that means is if the district paid for an expense in the past, or it's something that's required, the club cannot pay for those expenses. So, for example, the student club cannot pay for textbooks, workbooks, curriculum resources, or classroom supplies that is a requirement for the school district to provide. Some additional requirements include that all deposits must be made into a district-authorized bank account. These deposits must be made within a prescribed timeline and must be made in an intact format. What this means is we cannot hold out part of the monies collected to pay for a future expense. For example, if your club is holding a concession stand sale where they're selling soda and candy bars, and you run out of candy bars, you cannot pull money from the drawer and go to the grocery store to buy more candy bars. All monies must be deposited, and then those monies can be expensed through a district purchase order. Additionally, in order to expend monies, the club must have an available balance. What this means is the funds are considered a cash-controlled account. If the club doesn't have the startup funds, they can request a loan from student council. In order to ensure that the deposit is made by the required timeline and to ensure that monies are safeguarded at all times, the club sponsor is required to deliver the monies to the office or finance manager at their school daily. This is an area that continues to be an audit finding for the Tucson Unified School District, so it's important to understand that monies must be deposited daily with your office or finance manager to ensure that they make it to the bank within the prescribed time frame. The Auditor General's Office identifies specific requirements for spending all student club monies. You'll recall earlier I mentioned that student club monies must be raised by students, spent by the students, to benefit the students. To do this, all expenses must be approved by the students. This is documented in their signed student club meeting minutes. Once the students have approved an expense, a district purchase order must be issued. While student clubs are not required to follow the procurement rules that the school district must follow, it is strongly recommended that they do so that we can maximize their purchasing powers. What this means is that district contract vendors and the competitive bidding process is recommended when using student club monies. It should be noted as well that if a district employee will be providing a service or a good to the student club, so for example, if a student club wants to use a district employee to serve as a DJ for the school dance, or maybe a district employee owns a t-shirt printing business, in order to utilize that employee goods and services, a formal sealed solicitation must be issued prior to the student club being able to utilize that district employee's services. Further, if a district employee has a conflict of interest with a business, possibly a family member or a spouse owns the business, that conflict of interest must be disclosed. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, all student clubs must spend their monies through a district purchase order, meaning that no cash disbursements can be made. We must make all payments through a district purchase order. So we reviewed some of the requirements and the key requirements for student activities. Let's now talk about cash and what you need to know to ensure you're following the rules. The first step to understand is what type of monies are you collecting? Where do the monies belong? Cash is collected at our schools for multiple purposes. So of course, we've been talking about student activities. So these are student fundraisers, concession sales by clubs, possibly donations to a club when the donor specifies that it's going to the club. Those are all considered student activities, which are deposited into Fund 850. Another source of monies that are brought into our school campuses are gifts and donations. These donations are reviewed and approved by the governing board. We also have auxiliary operation monies that come into our campuses. These are monies that are coming through our bookstore operations. They include athletic ticket sales, concession sales, and field trips that are not sponsored by a club or are not tax credit eligible. Those monies are deposited into Fund 525. Another source of monies that come onto our campus are our tax credit monies. Tax credit are those monies that are collected based off of the governing board approved participation fee schedule, and tax credit eligible donations for those approved activities. These monies are deposited in Fund 526. Two other sources of monies that may come across our district campuses but are not considered district monies are booster club activities and PTO and PTA activities. These are monies that are raised by a third party because the booster and the PTO or the PTA are considered legally separate organizations. So what are the rules when it comes to handling cash? When cash is collected, it must be receipted. I cannot emphasize this enough. Cash must be receipted, all cash collected. This is done through pre-numbered receipts, ticket sales, and class lists. When you collect the cash, it must be counted and verified by another person. This count is then documented. The person collecting the money cannot be the same person who is depositing the money and reconciling the bank account. Cash must always be safeguarded. This means locked and protected. It cannot be kept in a desk drawer at the teacher's desk or in a teacher's car. Finally, cash must be deposited in a district bank account. Only the governing board has the authority to authorize a bank account. The monies cannot be deposited in an employee's bank account, even if the intent is for safekeeping. I mentioned the requirement to receipt all monies. There are a few methods that can be used to receipt these monies. First, we have pre-numbered receipts. These would be the triplicate receipt books or possibly a point-of-sale receipting program that issues a pre-numbered receipt. We can also use ticket sales. When we use ticket sales, we have a ticket log that identifies the beginning number and the ending number of the tickets sold. We might have different types of tickets. So, for example, at a football game, you might have an adult ticket versus a student ticket. So we'd have different ticket logs being used for the adult tickets and the student tickets, identifying the beginning number for adult ticket sales and the beginning number for student ticket sales. When using ticket sales, the tickets collected are collected by someone other than the person who sold the tickets. And another method for documenting the monies collected is through a class list or a club list. So this is often done when students are bringing money into the classroom. The club sponsor or the teacher can use a class list to identify which students paid for the field trip or for possibly the class t-shirt. Each day, the teacher uses a new class list to identify which monies are collected that day. While we don't issue a receipt to the student, the customer, being the student, is able to identify and see or witness that the teacher is documenting that they paid for their field trip or their t-shirt. How we verify the cash collected is done in multiple methods. So as I mentioned earlier, we can have copies of the receipts, or we can have the receipt log that's in the point of sale system. We have our ticket logs that identify the beginning number and the ending number. We also have a method of inventory that can be used. Inventory is when we possibly have a concession stand or maybe within the bookstore. We have a beginning count, and at the end of the sale we have an ending count, which identifies how many items were sold, and we know how much those items have been sold for. So we're able to verify the cash collected. When monies are collected, the club sponsor must complete a daily cash collection ticket sales report. This is an accounting of the monies collected and being turned in for deposit. A fully completed report is required daily, with all revenues being brought to the office or finance manager of your school by the sponsor of the club. The office or finance manager will reconcile the report in front of the club sponsor. If it is not fully completed, the office manager or finance manager will keep the money in order to safeguard it, receipt it, and return the report to the club for completion. The monies will be recorded in the accounting system, but not available to the club to spend until the completed report is received by finance. It is important to note that if an item is sold out of the point of sale system, specifically in the student's name, then this report is not required. If yearbooks are not sold specifically in the student's name in the point-of-sale system, this report is required as well as a list that includes the purchaser's name, the quantity purchased, and the price paid by each. And the final total is then reconciled by this report. So yearbooks are set up a little bit differently than other items in the point-of-sale system. Pre-sales of merchandise that includes multiple prices, such as those from catalog sales, must have a summary form attached showing the total quantity of items sold for each item, the prices, and the total money collected. And this form must reconcile to the daily cash collection report. Snack bar sales that are not sold via ticket sales must also have a summary form attached showing the item list, the quantity sold, the price per item, and the totals amount collected. If a student or parent pays for a field trip fee, a list of the students and the amount they paid must be attached. These are not tax credit fees and could be refundable if the trip does not occur. Student clubs occasionally receive donations. It is important for the district to properly record these donations to the club, not to the district. This form is used to document the club donation if the donor has not already provided a signed letter that the donation is for the club, not the school district. I mentioned earlier that the person collecting the monies cannot be the person recording the deposit or reconciling the bank accounts and authorizing the expenses. This is to ensure that we do not have the opportunity to commit fraud and often more common, the opportunity to correct or catch mathematical errors. This is considered separation of duties or segregation of duties. Here's an example of the cycle of the various positions involved in the cash collection process. You will see at the top of the cycle, the event is held and the club sponsor is collecting the money. The money is collected and verified by the two people, often the club sponsor and one of the club members. These two people are verifying that and completing the daily cash collection and ticket sale report. Those monies are brought to the office manager or finance manager of the school, who reconciles the cash in front of the club sponsor. The office or finance manager is then responsible for preparing that deposit. That deposit information is then forwarded to the finance department, who records that deposit in the district finance system. Let's talk about fundraisers. What is considered a fundraiser? Well, first and foremost, all fundraisers must be approved by the principal and the student council. A fundraiser is those monies collected by the efforts of students. Fundraising monies are all deposited into the student club bank account. Occasionally, we have joint fundraisers that are held in conjunction with our boosters or our PTOs or our PTAs. When we hold a fundraiser, all fundraisers must have a fundraising request form that is completed and approved by both the principal and the student council prior to the activity taking place. A club sponsor must be present at all fundraising activities and is responsible for preparing the documentation. If a fundraiser is intended for the purpose of student travel, such as a field trip, the travel itinerary must have prior approval by the principal and district leadership prior to the fundraiser taking place. When fundraisers take place, a daily cash collection ticket sale report is completed by the club sponsor and the club officer. That is completed daily. All monies received and the daily cash collection ticket sale report is then returned to the office manager or finance manager each day, regardless of the duration of the fundraising activity. So, for example, you may be selling prom tickets over a 3-week period of time. However, each day, the daily cash collection ticket sale report form and all monies collected that day must be returned to the office manager or finance manager of your campus. The office manager or finance manager on the campus will deposit the monies to the bank and submit the reconciled daily cash collection form ticket sale report to the finance department to post that deposit into the finance system. Finance will then record those monies in the student club, so the student club has access to those funds. When it comes to fundraisers, there are some specific guidelines to keep in mind. All sales involving student club organizations are classified as student activity fundraisers. All student fundraisers must be approved by the principal and student council, as mentioned earlier. All sales must be receiptable. Students are not permitted to sell from house to house. Promoting, selling, and conducting fundraisers cannot take place during instructional time. And finally, no home-cooked foods can be sold as a fundraiser. Joint fundraisers often take place. Joint fundraisers are those activities that a student club participates in with a PTO or a PTA. These fundraisers must have prior approval from the principal, and you'll find this requirement in the Tucson Unified School District Policy Manual, specifically Policy JJE-R. The Attorney General opinion from 1984 identifies the requirements for the joint fundraisers. Specifically, the proceeds should be allocated proportionately between the two organizations based on the level of effort devoted by each group on the project. This proportion should be determined by the school administration. Here's an example of what the Tucson Unified School District fundraising request form looks like. You will see here that the description of the student activity fundraiser is identified, the club officer and the club sponsor are signing off on this, as well as the principal is signing off on this. Here are some fundraiser examples. Oftentimes, our student clubs want to participate in a car wash as a fundraiser. There are two methods of how you can receipt the monies collected from a car wash. You can use ticket sales, meaning you're handing out tickets for each person who participates in the car wash, so you have a beginning number and an ending number, or you can issue a receipt by listing how much each person paid for the car wash. Oftentimes, our kids want to participate in penny drives, penny wars, stop the music, silver wars, things like that, where cash is collected on campus, but more in a coin format. A receipt must be issued by listing how much each person drops into the bucket. If this cannot happen, it is not considered a valid fundraiser. So in other words, if you cannot issue a receipt, then the fundraiser cannot take place as a student club fundraiser. This would best be supported or sponsored by a PTA or a booster. Often we have swim-a-thons or lap-thons or mile-a-thons for the cross-country team. For these types of fundraisers, receipts on pledge forms are submitted with the daily cash collection ticket sale report. Oftentimes, our student clubs are participating in a fundraiser which will benefit a nonprofit organization, and this is permitted. However, these monies must be deposited into the student club and not be handed over directly to the nonprofit. In other words, we cannot collect cash and hand that cash over to the nonprofit. The monies must be deposited into the student activity account, and then a purchase order must be issued for that nonprofit. Student clubs are not permitted to hold a raffle or any other game of chance. They are not permitted to be held by students. So this means the use of a spinner, dice, or some other means that determines somebody's entrance fee is not permissible. So anything that's considered a game of chance or a raffle is not permissible for our students. It should be noted, however, that silent auctions are permissible because they are not considered a game of chance. The Arizona Attorney General opinion from 1983, I-8318, identifies that only those organizations that are not school-controlled, such as off-campus clubs, Rotary clubs, civic groups, parent-teacher organizations, that fit within the tax-exempt categories as defined by the Arizona Revised Statute, may hold raffles. So this means student clubs cannot hold raffles and cannot participate in those raffles. Occasionally, our student activities need some sort of a change fund. A change fund is a cash drawer, for example, when you are selling tickets and you need to be able to have that cash available to make change during the ticket sales. A change fund may be established from the student activities bank account. This is done through the requisition purchase order process. A requisition is submitted and a PO is issued in the name of the custodian of the funds, typically the club sponsor. A check is issued, made payable to that custodian of funds. The check is then cashed by the custodian or the club sponsor, and that cash is then used to create that change fund. Prior to the end of the school year, or when the change fund is no longer needed, whichever comes first, the change fund must be returned to the office manager or finance manager so that it can be redeposited into the student activities bank account. Change funds cannot be created from the cash collected. It must go through the requisition PO process. And to be clear, change funds are not petty cash funds, meaning we're not spending the change fund. We're only using it to make change during an event. Occasionally, there is some confusion about a prepayment versus a cash advance. Cash advances are those monies that are provided to a club sponsor in advance of the event because they might be going out of town and need to be able to have the cash in order to pay for the expenses. That is considered a cash advance and is only provided when specific rules are followed. And if those rules aren't followed, club sponsor privileges for being able to obtain a cash advance can be discontinued. This is different from a prepayment to a vendor. School districts are not permitted to pay for services and goods prior to actually receiving those services and goods. So we're not able to prepay the DJ for a school dance as an example. However, we are able to make a deposit. So if the DJ or the dance facility requires a deposit in order to hold that particular date for the event, we are able to make a deposit, but it must be clearly noted on the requisition and the purchase order that it is a deposit, not a prepayment for goods and services. All these transactions are documented on our Student Club meeting minutes. Student Club meeting minute forms are available on the School Finance intranet website. Within a Student Club meeting minute, we must identify the club name, the date the meeting is held, any action that is approved, and this action must be very clearly documented, so ensure that you include very detailed information, particularly when it's an expense that's being approved. That detail should include what the students approved, including the name of the vendor, the amount to be paid, when that should be paid, specifically how much has been authorized. Our student clubs must then sign these meeting minutes. So the club officers are signing these meeting minutes to show that they authorized these expenses. These club meeting minutes are then attached to all requisitions to show that the student club approved that purchase. So let's recap some information that we covered today. Student activities are those monies raised by the students, spent by the student to benefit the students. Club sponsors are ultimately the ones responsible, not the students. We must receipt all monies collected. Those receipts must be reconciled to the documentation that is provided. All monies must be safeguarded at all times. Those monies are then brought to the office manager or the finance manager for deposit. We must ensure that the duties of collecting the money, recording the monies, depositing the monies, and reconciling those bank accounts are segregated amongst multiple individuals within the district. That is to protect you, to protect the individuals who are involved in that process. I want to thank you for taking the time and participating in this training today. Hopefully, now you have a better understanding of the requirements for student activities and specifically those requirements for handling cash on your campus. As a reminder, be sure you sign your sponsor declaration form that identifies the key responsibilities you have as a club sponsor. Additionally, the club sponsor should work with the club officers to ensure they complete the student signature form. That form can be found on the Student Finance intranet. These forms must be completed and turned in to your school finance manager on an annual basis. So once again, thank you for participating in this training.